It was a quiet afternoon in a small-town grocery store when things took a shocking turn. An elderly woman with a kind smile and a noticeable limp entered the store, leaning heavily on her cane. She wasn't there to cause trouble, just to pick up a few essentials. But for reasons that still baffle everyone, the store manager, a woman known for her sharp tongue and cold demeanor, decided this elderly woman was her target for the day. What began as a simple misunderstanding quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Customers watched in stunned silence as the manager, with a smug attitude, hurled harsh words at the elderly woman, accusing her of taking too long and holding up the line. The room grew tense as the woman, visibly shaken, tried to explain herself, but the manager wouldn't let it go. The woman's trembling hands struggled to hold her wallet, her voice breaking as she apologized for the delay. Instead of showing any compassion, the manager's anger boiled over into an act of shocking aggression, something no one expected or could believe was happening right in front of them. Unbeknownst to the manager, standing at the back of the store, blending in with the other customers, was the elderly woman's son. And not just any son, he was the owner of this very store. He had built it from the ground up with the values of respect, kindness, and community at its core. Watching this scene unfold, his heart pounded in his chest, torn between disbelief and outrage. But here's where it gets interesting. The son didn't step in right away. He wanted to see how far the manager would go to truly understand the depth of her behavior. Little did she know, her world was about to change in a way she'd never see coming. What happens next will leave you speechless, as the truth is revealed and justice is served in the most unexpected way. Stay tuned to see how this story unfolds. You won't want to miss what happens next. The store manager's voice grew louder as she continued berating the elderly woman. Shoppers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of whether they should step in or stay out of it. The air felt thick with tension, and even the store employees seemed frozen in place, unsure of how to respond to their boss's behavior. The elderly woman, now visibly upset, tried to explain that she was recovering from a recent surgery and moving as fast as she could. Her words only seemed to fuel the manager's anger. The manager crossed her arms, a smirk on her face as she spat out, "If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't be out shopping at all." It was a moment that seemed to hang in the air, heavy with discomfort and disbelief. Meanwhile, her son, the store owner, watched from a distance, his emotions swirling. On one hand, he felt a deep sadness for his mother, who had clearly been through enough already. On the other hand, a quiet anger burned inside him. How could someone treat another person like this, especially in a place he had worked so hard to make welcoming for everyone? As he stood there, memories of his mother flooded his mind. She was the reason he had opened the store in the first place. Growing up, she had taught him the importance of treating everyone with dignity, no matter who they were or where they came from. She had always been his biggest supporter, encouraging him to chase his dreams even when things got tough. And now, here she was, being humiliated in a place meant to embody those very values. The manager, oblivious to the connection between her victim and the man watching from the shadows, continued her tirade. Her words became crueler, and the other customers started whispering amongst themselves. One brave soul quietly asked the elderly woman if she was okay, but the manager quickly shut them down, demanding they mind their own business. The store owner clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't ready to reveal himself, not yet. He wanted to see if anyone else would step in, or if the manager's behavior would spiral even further. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, the tension building as everyone in the store waited to see what would happen next. The store seemed to hold its breath as the scene continued to unfold. The elderly woman, struggling to steady herself, glanced at the other customers, hoping someone might speak up. But most avoided her gaze, too nervous or unsure to get involved. A young cashier, who had only been working at the store for a few weeks, looked torn. Her eyes darted between the manager and the elderly woman, her hands gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. The son, still observing from the back of the store, noticed the hesitation on the cashier's face. She seemed to want to intervene, but didn't dare challenge her boss. It struck him how power dynamics can silence even the kindest intentions, and he wondered how long this behavior had gone unchecked. Was this the first time his manager had acted this way, or had others faced her wrath too? Nearby, a mother shopping with her 2 children whispered quietly to her son, "This isn't right," as she handed him her phone. "Record this," she said under her breath, her voice trembling. The boy, no older than 10, nodded and held up the phone discreetly, capturing everything. The store manager had no idea her actions were being documented. As the tirade continued, the son thought about the bigger picture. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. What about other vulnerable people who might have walked into the store before her? How many times had this manager humiliated someone who didn't have a voice or didn't know who to turn to? A man in a suit, standing in the cereal aisle, looked as if he wanted to step forward. He glanced at the son, not knowing who he was, but perhaps sensing his unease. "Are you seeing this?" he whispered quietly, as if trying to pull the son into the moment. The son gave a small nod, his expression unreadable, his mind racing with decisions. The elderly woman finally spoke again, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her words barely audible. But the manager cut her off once more, her tone dripping with mockery. "Oh, you're sorry. Maybe you should be sorry for coming in here and wasting everyone's time." The son had heard enough. He stepped forward, his heart pounding. But he wasn't ready to reveal the truth, yet. Instead, he chose his words carefully, hoping to diffuse the situation without blowing his cover. As he approached, all eyes turned to him, waiting to see what he would do. The tension in the store had reached a boiling point, and the story was far from over. The store fell silent as the son stepped closer, his calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions brewing inside him. The elderly woman turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment, unsure who this man was or why he was stepping in. The store manager, however, wasn't fazed. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "Can I help you with something?" the manager snapped, her voice sharp and dismissive. The son didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at his mother, giving her a reassuring nod. Then he turned to the manager, his voice steady but firm. "I think you owe this woman an apology," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The manager let out a short, mocking laugh. "An apology? For what? Holding her accountable for holding up the line? Maybe people should learn to move faster." She smirked, looking around as if expecting others to agree with her. But the atmosphere in the store had shifted. The tension was no longer just about the manager and the elderly woman. It was about what kind of place this store really was and whether anyone would finally call her out. The other customers began whispering, and the young cashier looked down at her hands, clearly wishing she could disappear. The son held his ground, his eyes locked on the manager. "I don't think treating someone with respect takes much time," he said evenly. "She's doing her best. You have no right to speak to her like that." The manager's smirk faded, replaced by a defensive glare. "And who are you to tell me how to do my job?" she shot back, her tone laced with hostility. Before he could respond, the mother with the recording phone stepped forward. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "You've gone too far. I've been coming here for months, and I've seen how you treat people. Someone needs to say something." The manager's face turned red, a mix of anger and embarrassment. She opened her mouth to retaliate, but now murmurs of agreement rippled through the store. The suit-clad man nodded. "She's right," he said. "We've all seen it." The manager's eyes darted around, realizing the tide was turning against her. But before she could react, the son took a deep breath and said, "You want to know who I am?" His voice carried across the store, silencing the whispers. Everyone waited, hanging on his every word. The truth was about to come out, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. The manager, still unaware of the storm about to hit her, crossed her arms again and stared him down. "Yes, I do," she said. "Who do you think you are to lecture me?" The son straightened, his expression calm but commanding. "I'm the owner of this store," he said, his voice steady and clear. Gasps rippled through the room, and the manager's face went pale. The silence that followed the son's revelation was deafening. The store manager stood frozen, her smug expression wiped away, replaced with sheer disbelief. "You're lying," she stammered, though her voice lacked conviction. "You can't be the owner." Her eyes darted to the other employees, searching for someone to back her up, but they all looked down, unwilling to meet her gaze. The son didn't flinch. His calm yet authoritative tone carried across the room. "I stay quiet to see how you treat people when you think no one's watching, but now I've seen enough." He glanced at his mother, his expression softening for just a moment. "And the fact that you thought it was okay to humiliate her, of all people, speaks volumes about your character." The manager's mouth opened, then closed again, as if searching for an excuse. I didn't know she was your mother," she blurted out, as if that made her actions any less wrong. "Does that make it better?" the son asked, his voice sharp. "Would it have been fine if she were just another customer, someone without a connection to me?" His words hung in the air, challenging not just the manager but everyone in the room to think about what they had just witnessed. Before the manager could respond, the young cashier stepped forward hesitantly. Her voice trembled, but there was a new resolve in her eyes. "It's not the first time she's done this," the cashier said, her words shocking everyone. "She's been rude to customers before and to us. I've been too scared to say anything because I didn't want to lose my job." The son's eyes flicked to the cashier, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. "No one should feel afraid to speak up." The tension in the store deepened. The manager's face grew even paler as she realized the walls were closing in. But then, in a desperate attempt to save herself, she turned to the crowd. "You're all just ganging up on me. I've worked here for years, and I've always done my job." The mother with the phone stepped forward again, holding it up for everyone to see. "Your job? Is this how you think your job should be done?" she asked, her voice cutting through the manager's excuses. "Because I've got this all on video, and I think it'll be very clear to everyone watching what kind of person you are." The manager's composure cracked as she realized her actions had been documented. Her eyes widened, and she stammered something unintelligible, but no one was listening anymore. The son turned back to her, his tone as firm as ever. "I gave you this position because I trusted you to uphold the values this store was built on, but you've done the opposite, and now everyone knows it." The weight of his words hit like a hammer, but just as the crowd thought they had seen everything, a new voice spoke up from the back of the store. "She's not the only one you need to look into," a man said, stepping forward. The suit-clad customer had been quiet until now, but his expression was grim. "There's more going on here than you realize. You might want to check into how things have been run behind your back." The son's brows furrowed, and the room collectively held its breath. What more could there be? The stakes had just been raised even higher, and the truth seemed far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The son turned toward the man in the suit, his gaze sharp. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with curiosity and suspicion. The man sighed and stepped forward, the weight of what he was about to say clearly visible in his expression. "I'm a supplier for this store," he began, his tone measured but serious. "And I've noticed some irregularities, missing payments, orders that don't add up, things that don't make sense unless someone is either cutting corners or taking a cut for themselves." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. The son's expression darkened as he processed the implications. "Are you saying someone's been stealing from the store?" he asked, his voice growing colder. The man nodded grimly. "I've been suspicious for months, but didn't have enough proof to come forward. I never thought the owner was involved, but now that I see how things are managed here, well, it all adds up." The manager's face went from pale to furious, and she pointed a shaky finger at the man. You don't know what you're talking about. I've worked here longer than anyone, and I've done nothing but my job. The son's voice cut through her protests like a blade. Your job? Your job was to run this store with integrity. But instead, you've been mistreating customers, intimidating employees, and now there's reason to believe you've been skimming from the business. You're done. For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation was over, but then the young cashier spoke up again. There's something else, she said quietly, looking at the floor before meeting the son's eyes. She's been forcing some of us to clock out early, even when we're still working. She says it's to save money for the store, but her voice trailed off, and the implication was clear. The son's jaw tightened as a wave of anger washed over him. He turned to the manager, who now looked like she wanted to disappear. Is that true? He demanded. The manager stammered, unable to come up with a defense. The silence was her answer, and it spoke volumes. But just when it seemed like the story had reached its peak, the mother with the phone held up her recording once more. You need to see this part, she said, rewinding to a moment most people hadn't noticed in the chaos. The video clearly showed the manager pocketing cash from the elderly woman's payment while pretending to ring it up. The store erupted in gasps, and the manager's face crumbled. There was no way out now. The son shook his head, his disappointment palpable. I trusted you, he said simply, his voice heavy with finality. You're fired, and I'll be involving the authorities. You've hurt too many people, and it ends now. As the manager was escorted out of the store, the atmosphere shifted. Employees and customers alike felt a sense of justice, though the weight of what had just unfolded still lingered. The son turned to his mother, his expression softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry you went through this, he said quietly. But just as everyone thought the drama was over, the supplier stepped forward again. Before you clean house completely, he said, you should know, there's another employee who's been helping her. I don't know who, but the signs are there. The son froze, the final twist leaving him, and everyone else, staring at each other in stunned silence. The story wasn't quite over after all. The son turned toward the man in the suit, his gaze sharp. What do you mean by that? He asked, his voice steady but laced with curiosity and suspicion. The man sighed and stepped forward, the weight of what he was about to say clearly visible in his expression. I'm a supplier for this store, he began, his tone measured but serious. And I've noticed some irregularities. Missing payments, orders that don't add up, things that don't make sense unless someone is either cutting corners or taking a cut for themselves. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. The son's expression darkened as he processed the implications. Are you saying someone's been stealing from the store? He asked, his voice growing colder. The man nodded grimly. I've been suspicious for months but didn't have enough proof to come forward. I never thought the owner was involved, but now that I see how things are managed here, well, it all adds up. The manager's face went from pale to furious, and she pointed a shaky finger at the man. You don't know what you're talking about. I've worked here longer than anyone, and I've done nothing but my job. The son's voice cut through her protests like a blade. Your job? Your job was to run this store with integrity, but instead you've been mistreating customers, intimidating employees, and now there's reason to believe you've been skimming from the business. You're done. For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation was over, but then the young cashier spoke up again. There's something else, she said quietly, looking at the floor before meeting the son's eyes. She's been forcing some of us to clock out early, even when we're still working. She says it's to save money for the store, but her voice trailed off, and the implication was clear. The son's jaw tightened as a wave of anger washed over him. He turned to the manager, who now looked like she wanted to disappear. Is that true? He demanded. The manager stammered, unable to come up with a defense. The silence was her answer, and it spoke volumes. But just when it seemed like the story had reached its peak, the mother with the phone held up her recording once more. You need to see this part, she said, rewinding to a moment most people hadn't noticed in the chaos. The video clearly showed the manager pocketing cash from the elderly woman's payment while pretending to ring it up. The store erupted in gasps, and the manager's face crumbled. There was no way out now. The son shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "I trusted you," he said simply, his voice heavy with finality. "You're fired, and I'll be involving the authorities. You've hurt too many people, and it ends now." As the manager was escorted out of the store, the atmosphere shifted. Employees and customers alike felt a sense of justice, though the weight of what had just unfolded still lingered.